So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for tonight, who's Glenn Jones. So Glenn, if you'd like to get yourself unmuted now, ready, thank you. Glenn will be a familiar face to many of you. He's a very familiar face around the community. Had a very illustrious career as an English teacher, including head of English at Wade Academy, as well as assistant rector of Glenrothes High School and headmaster of Oakwood School in Kirkcaldy, as well as 12 years as an examiner of A-level English. And he's not got any less busy since. He's chair of Silverdyke's Liaison Committee and of Silverdyke's Liaison Committee and CELLARDYKE Residents Association, and is vice chair of Kilrenny and Anstruther Borough Collection. He's also a keen sailor and is often seen around Anstruther and CELLARDYKE on his bicycle, often with his lovely collie Lucy. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Glenn. Thank you.
Right. What I have for you tonight is a detective story. We'll learn more about it as it goes along. Like any good detective story, it has lots of interesting settings. In fact, this story begins in Anstruther, but takes us to various more exotic places around the world. We go to Australia, we go to San Francisco, we go to Liverpool. And like all good detective stories, it has a beautiful lady in it, whom I will introduce to you later. But first of all, as it is a detective story, we need some clues. So here's the first one. Now, what I'm asking you to think about is, and if you live in Anstruther, the answer will be fairly obvious. What's the connection between this house, which many will recognize as the Hermitage, this house, which is Cunsey House, which for some time relatively recently was Willie Band's garage. This place, which is the Anstruther Harbour looking to the east, as you'll know. Between this trade, there's this rather harsh and brutal trade of whaling. This ship, I'm not going to say what that ship is because it's important later in the plot. This famous English port, which is Liverpool. This famous son of CELLARDYKE features, and this is Stephen Williamson, MP. And indirectly, this statue in Liverpool has a relevance to what happens in this tale. We'll be introduced to his father more than him. This is Henry Balfour, who was later to be ennobled. And clue, which I'm going to give you, is this gate. How on earth are all these clues connected, and what brings them together? That is what we're setting out to find out. And in fact, this is what brings them all together. It's a portrait which was found damaged in Anstruther Town Hall about 6 years ago by Wade Centre staff. There had been renovations, and I suspect a number of things were damaged and sort of kicked into a storeroom before the builders left. That's all I can imagine. Instead of chucking this on the skip, the staff of the Wade Centre, who are greatly to be thanked by the community for this, phoned the Borough Collection, and as the chairman, I said I would go down and see what they had. Now, there were a couple of large whiskery photographs of Victorian provosts, one or two things of not great interest, and this large portrait. At the bottom, there is a label, and it is the original label. It says the Surgeon Thomas Black Anstruther by Robert Fowler Royal Institute, also Anstruther, 1878. Now, as you can see, it's very badly damaged. There's a huge rip in it. There are dunks all over the place. Somebody had tried to nail it back into its frame with a 2-inch set of 2-inch joiner's nails. It was an absolute mess. So I tried to find out something about it. Rather surprisingly, it was immediately available and said to be hanging in Anstruther Town Hall. It was a portrait of the Reverend Thomas Black, which is a bit of a strange thing because it's clearly not what it said on the label. I did find out that Thomas Black was born in Weems in 1818. He died in Anstruther in 1864. He took up medical practice in Anstruther in 1840 and was married to Jessie Phillips. And His children were Julia, John, Robert, and Elizabeth Williamson. It's quite significant that her middle name was Williamson, but more later. So quite clearly, all of my evidence was that this wasn't a painting of a minister. And in fact, all the evidence points to this. There is in the British Medical Directory his qualification. Black, Thomas Anstruther, Easter, Fifeshire, LRCS, Edinburgh, 1840, surgeon to the parochial boards of Anstruther, Kilkenny and Carnby. It actually says Kilkenny, and if he was looking after Kilkenny as well, he must have been a very far-travelled man. Wee typo there. His memorial is in Anstruther churchyard, and actually it can now be seen from the town hall window. It's an interesting memorial. He died tragically returning from visiting a patient in Pitt and Weem in February 1864. He was hugely well respected and left his wife and children. The monument raised by the people, unless somebody knows that it was originally a full column, is a broken column with vine leaves draping over it, symbolizing, I think, something great that is tragically broken early. Time has not been very kind to his tombstone, but it speaks of his engaging manners, his many friends, how much regretted his loss was. It was a serious public loss, and to keep him in remembrance, the public have raised this memorial. Now, trying to find out some more about the surgeon Thomas Black, I discovered that he had taken part in 2 whaling expeditions. I don't know which ship he sailed on or which expedition, but it was before he reached the age of 23 and took up practice in Anstruther. It's reported, well, there were whaling ships in Kirkcaldy, there were whaling ships from Queens, in fact, there were whaling ships all around. I'd love to find out which expeditions he was on. This is just a painting of the time showing whalers in the Arctic ice. And some Scottish whalers at their entertainment. Their lunch, I do believe, is over on the right. And this is something which I almost got to touch but haven't yet laid hands on. It's the surgeon's sea box and writing desk, which Thomas Black took on his 2 expeditions to the Arctic. And I got in touch about 15 months ago with Catherine Moncrief, who is a descendant, a direct descendant of Thomas Black's brother Walter. And her mother had known the uncle, and I had hoped to be able to talk to her and get information, but very, very sadly, she was ill, the lockdown came about, and I'm still no closer. But that was his writing box, which brings us back to the Hermitage. Now, the Hermitage originally wasn't called the Hermitage, but it was bought and rebuilt by John GOODSIR in 1814. And became a surgery used by his son Henry and by his son John, later Sir John GOODSIR. And there is a daguerreotype of John GOODSIR, who became the professor of anatomy at Edinburgh University. There is his tomb in Dean's Cemetery. And at the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, he studied and lectured on cell life. So he combined the medical practice in Anstruther with scientific experimentation and the collection of botanical samples, which was fairly enthusiastically done by a number of people at the time. He was very practical. He kept a golden eagle in his surgery. I don't think that would be much permitted now. And the local people used to come with live animals to feed it with. Rats, mice, even a cat. It's not a very nice story from our point of view. There were different times. John GOODSIR's brother Henry died on the Franklin expedition to the Arctic in search of the Northwest Passage. I find it hard to believe that Thomas Black and Henry GOODSIR were not acquainted, may even have been at sea together at some point. I don't know. I'd love to find out more. So here we are. This is our portrait. This is our surgeon, Thomas Black, not a minister, definitely. The man who took up medical practice by the age of 23. It's a fascinating picture. I love the triangulation of the face and the hands. His face looks tired, but it also looks very, very, very sharp. A few months ago, I had a surgical procedure, and when the surgeon leaned forward to mark the bit here, where he was going to make his incision, I suddenly remembered this picture. That's exactly the same look. Those hands are going to come out of those pockets and mark, possibly not with a green felt tip pen, the point. This is where we're going in. Now, Thomas Black, he had the 4 children, as you know, and he was a particularly successful and respected doctor. It's recorded that he actually delivered live 4 quads, which was almost unheard of at the time. And there are other records. He was hugely respected, interested in, again, all sorts of things. He was a horticulturalist, he was a prominent citizen, and undoubtedly had a very, very strong career ahead of him. He had been recommended to the practice in Anstruther by a Dr. Small of Weems, who was from Anstruther, I believe, and other gentlemen. And so when he graduated in 1840, he came to take over the practice from John GOODSIR, who went to be professor at Edinburgh University. Now, here we have, on the 29th of February, sorry, on the 28th of February 1864, the Black family are looking forward to what is clearly going to be a prosperous future. Their father is hugely respected, their family is prospering, the young children are growing, but that is going to change dramatically. This is a picture of Anstruther as it was, well, not then, but a little later, but it gives you a clear idea if you're not familiar with the town. Looking at the harbour, the part over the pier on the other side of the Union Harbour didn't exist at the time of Thomas Black. It was built afterwards by Thomas Stevenson, the great engineer. There was a delay in building it, which was quite significant in our story. Now, this is Anstruther Harbour as it was in 1857. And what I'd like to do is to say something more about the tragedy that took place and try to identify some of what happened. Now, at 10 o'clock that evening, I'm going to read a little bit here from a written account of it. Thomas Black received a call to a seriously ill patient in Pitton Ween. Hiring a driver, horse and trap from Mr. Donaldson at the Royal Hotel in Roger Street, he made his call and returned about 10:30 p.m. After speaking with Mr. Donaldson for about 5 minutes, he was last seen heading east up the High Street towards his home in School Green. Now, as we've said, that the Hermitage is over there. This is School Green. To orientate yourself a little, this is St. Andrew's Road. Thomas Black returning from Pitton Ween, and this is a very dark, very, very unpleasant wintry night after the lamps were extinguished, because they were extinguished at 10 p.m. to save money in those days. He returned to the Royal Hotel here to return the horse and trap to Mr. Donaldson. He spoke with them for about 5 minutes, and then he was last seen heading up the old High Street, past what is now Gray and Pringles and Martin's Pet Shop. And in order to get to the Hermitage, I would imagine that he'd do pretty much what we do now. The town hall wasn't there at that time, but the obvious route to the School Green is up here. There's the graveyard, School Green is here. He would have come along here and turned up to go to the Hermitage. He'd probably have entered by a gate there. But he didn't reach home. Instead, he ended up where this arrow is down here, drowning in the foreshore. Now, nobody knows why that happened. There was speculation he might have turned for some reason. Perhaps there was another call. Perhaps some cries of distress were heard from the west beach of the harbour. Nobody knows. There were no witnesses then. There was nobody who came forward as a patient who'd called for his help. He fell into the harbour. I imagine it is about this point, because I've walked this and I've tried to work out what would have happened. If he'd been going home, he would have ended up here. But let's just suppose hypothetically he got to this point and heard some noise or cry, which he felt was a cry for help. He would have come down here to this point to investigate. Now at that time, this area that you can see there was just muddy, silty foreshore. And it was completely unimproved. I was just guessing that that's what happened. He could have lost his way completely in the dark, blundered around here and just fell in. Nobody knows. It's just a matter of complete conjecture. There were no witnesses then. The procurator fiscal held the precognition and could find no reason. Beside his body were found his surgical instruments. All his possessions, his gold watch and other things were still on his body. There was no signs of violence and clearly no evidence of theft. So how on earth did he end up there? Now, the tragic element of this is that he was stuck in the mud for 2 hours as the tide came in, and people in the town heard his cries for help, but nobody went to assist. Why? I don't know. Maybe they thought it was people up to no good in the dark. Maybe they thought it was drunks. I don't know. But his cries for help lasted 2 hours until he drowned on the tide, leaving his 4 children fatherless and his wife Jessie a widow. Now this is just a quick look, more recent than the events I just described. This is to Anstruther West. There's the Esplanade. And here is, as far as I could work out, just beyond that, the harbour wall there, is the spot where I think he must have drowned in the harbour mud. There was no sea wall there at that time. It was just a muddy slope down. So did he slip in the wet and then flounder more and more into the silt, trying to get his footing? It was pitch black. We don't know. Whatever the reason, he tragically died, and as we know, the monument was raised to him, and there was great, enormous sadness and possibly a little guilt in the town. Now, this brings us back to our portrait. Portrait of Thomas Black, Surgeon, Anstruther, by Robert Fowler R.I Institute, also Anstruther. So I had managed to find out who Thomas Black was and what his story was. And I'm very pleased to say that the Borough Collection managed to raise funds and keep pushing until the painting was restored in collaboration with Fife Council and returned to Anstruther. And there's a picture of it being restored to Anstruther Town Hall. You get some impression of the size and the weight, because unbeknown to us, the restorers actually put a protective glass front on it, which increased the weight, and it needed a huge bracket. I thought we were never going to get that done. Just a look at the team who restored the surgeon to Anstruther Town Hall. Through that window, you can actually see his tombstone. Louise McEwen represents the centre staff who found it and could so easily have just kicked it onto the skip, thinking it was old rubbish. Gavin Grant, Fife Council's head of art, I forget his exact title, but he does all sorts in that respect. He was able to organise the restoration professionally at the firm in Dundee, whose name has just slipped my memory. And the whiskery grey looking guy at the back was the one who found out the story that you're just hearing. Now there's another small element there, which is the portrait of Windsor Castle, which many people remember hanging in Anstruther Town Hall. Well, it wasn't there either, but when I looked at the websites, the BBC website of Scottish Paintings of Britain says quite clearly it was hanging in Anstruther Town Hall, and neither of them were hanging in Anstruther Town Hall. That one wasn't there. The other one was badly damaged. Kevin Dunyan and I took a trip to Glenorthis to view this, because it had been placed in the depository of Fife Council over there, and they've got lots of other things there. The Provost Chain of Anstruther is there as well. It's a really interesting place, but what we wanted to see was this, and on it I saw a little label saying donated by Mrs. Logan of Liverpool. It's a wonderful painting. It's huge. We had thought of asking if we could get that back in Anstruther Town Hall, but there is literally nowhere to put it anymore. Perhaps a small reproduction one day. But this is Robert Fowler, the painter. He was born in January 1850. Now, I'm just going to move some of this stuff here because there's too much in my eye line. Sorry, yeah, you don't know what I'm doing. I've just moved some pictures of the key members to the bottom of there. Right. He was born in Kilrenny. His father was Robert Fowler Sr. and his wife was Jessie Dees. In the census of 1851, there I found him living in Roger Street, Anstruther. Robert Fowler, aged 1. His sister Jessie, 1 month. His father was not at home. Occupation, ship's master. Now this is Cansey House. This is where our clue for Cansey House comes into the story, because it was owned over the censuses of 61 and 71 by John and Catherine Brown, who were related to the Fowlers. Now there was one very famous boarder at Cansey House in the 1860s, and it was of course Robert Louis Stevenson, who was there as an 18-year-old with his engineer father. His father was hoping he would get interested in engineering, but as we know, that didn't work. Also boarding in the house and missing him by 2 years was Robert Fowler, who was boarding with his aunts. Now, in the websites, if you look online, you'll see there's some rather snotty descriptions of him being left there while his parents were traveling the world. In fact, that's not exactly true, because his father, as said, was a ship's master, and he was in fact the senior captain of the BALFOUR Williamson line of Liverpool. So inevitably, he was not going to be there. There's an interesting story that Robert Fowler's first artistic endeavours were on the wall of Cansey House. His wife, his Aunt Catherine, permitted him to draw there in pencil, and she kept wiping it off the chimney breast so that he could do more pictures for her. She must have been very, very indulgent. But he went from there to Liverpool. His father took him down to Liverpool, where he went to Liverpool College School. Prior to that, he had been at Anstruther Borough School. And there he would almost certainly have been a fellow pupil of John Black, the son of Thomas Black. And they lived not very far apart. So Cansey House is not that far from the Hermitage, as we know. At Liverpool College School, he didn't thrive very well. He got through it, he said, by doing caricatures of all the masters for the other boys, who then did his school lessons for him and did his homework. So it was like a fairly good system. He was put to work. Now online it says in an office, but I would be fairly certain that it was the office in the Balfour Williamson line. His father was the senior captain after all. And his mother was the niece of the great niece of Stephen Williamson himself. So there is a strong family connection there with the Williamsons. He didn't prosper in that office either, because he, again, was very popular with all the other workers, producing paintings and caricatures for them. And they said he was too expensive on the paper store, and they got rid of him, and he went to London, and his father took him down there. He went down there to study, but he said he actually learned more about art at the British Museum than he did at any school. There are two portraits, self-portraits of Robert Fowler at work. He was a very enormously prolific painter. He was very well known. He exhibited in Paris and in Munich. His paintings now have a worldwide following. They appear at auction still. I'll come to that in a moment. What did interest me was finding this caricature of Robert Fowler over there. To have a caricature, this was 1921, he died 5 years after that. You have to be well known, you have to be a character, and you have to be recognizable. There's no point in doing it. It says a lot. So he set up a studio in Liverpool after he had studied in London and went up there. And it is recorded that his studio was welcome at all times. The doors were open to all sorts of artists, poets, writers, and young painters always got a welcome there, and were given any advice, help and time that he wanted. How he found time for all that, I don't know, because he was an incredibly prolific painter. He was a master of many subjects. This is a seascape of Liverpool docks, sorry. There's a bit Turner-esque, you know, it's kind of a little bit that style. But he didn't just do that. Sometimes you see him described as a pre-Raphaelite painter. Well, he could do all that stuff as well. But he didn't only do that. This is a Welsh maiden by Robert Fowler. I noticed this was on offer on eBay at $15,000 back in November. The Victorians, being very prudish, could only have pictures of diaphaноusly clad maidens on their walls, provided they were illustrating classical themes or religious topics. That made it all right. But that's a beautiful painting, all cynicism aside. Apart from those pictures, landscapes were very popular. Currently, a reasonably large landscape by Robert Fowler sells for upwards of £1,500. Small ones can be found for about 150, but I'll see in a moment where I think those come from. This is a lovely painting. I love this one. This combines landscapes with boats and with maidens. There's a bit of all those themes in this. This is Dreaming by Robert Fowler. That last sold at Christie's for £30,000. It had been estimated between 12 and 18. I love this painting. I'd love to see the original, but I don't know where it is. There's an incredible play of light there. And is she dreaming of her boyfriend who's at sea? There's a ship heading away there. Lovely painting. There's a whole topic in Robert Fowler by itself. Again, all right to hang nudies on your wall if they're religious. This is Eve, of course, but this isn't just your ordinary Eve, I think. This is a very well-built Victorian Eve, but behind Eve is another Eve. Is that her conscience telling her, go on, do it, or don't do it, or do it? There's a lot. Now, this is another painting by Robert Fowler, which sold for a good price. I don't know what it was, though. The Birth of Venus, painted by many. But this is the kind of an Anster, The Birth of Venus, because there's definitely a couple of seagulls up there. There's 3 seagulls in the composition. And this is, I like this picture. This is the Dance of Salome. It is sold in New York for £100,000. And by this time, he was also experimenting with Japanese painting styles. And this is a biblical topic. These are Victorian ladies, but that's a beautiful Japanese bush, a tree, bonsai growing out over this scene. And if you look at the whole composition, it's fascinating. I don't have time to go into it because there are other things I need to look at. But quizzical look from one, applauding, but thinking it's not perhaps a great idea. You know, there's a lot going on. Now, he was a prolific illustrator of books. This is Wales. You know, you'll see the billing there, painted by Robert Fowler R.I. I have a copy of this. I didn't realize that the second edition only had 34, but I couldn't afford the first edition, which had 64 plates by Robert Fowler in it. Edward Thomas did the text of this. That's quite interesting. That we may remember Edward Thomas for his poem Addlestrop. Yes, I remember Addlestrop, about the train stopping in that peaceful situation. He wrote biography, reviews, topographical works, and his poetry was written before he was killed at the Battle of Arras in 1917. Back to our story, Robert Fowler was a very prolific illustrator. I suspect a lot of the small landscapes that are available were actually the ones he made for his illustrations of books. Just a thought. So there we have it. We've looked into something of the story and their lives. But what I wanted to know was what connects the surgeon and the painter. Thomas Blacker died in 1864. The portrait was painted posthumously in Liverpool in 1878. Robert Fowler was only 14 years old and living in County House at the time when the surgeon drowned in Anstruther Harbour. So what can be the connection? Well, here's a piece of evidence I found. This is the Chacabuco, one of those many beautiful, strong sailing ships owned by the Balfour Williamson line of Liverpool. It was built by Gooley Brothers of Dundee. Now, the tragedy here is that it had sailed from San Francisco. It had rounded the Horn. It had sailed up the Atlantic and it was just hours from its home port of Liverpool when it was rammed by a steamer with only 3 survivors. Among those lost was Robert Black, aged 19. Now, Robert Black was the son of Thomas Black. So, within the space of 10 years, Jessie Black has lost her husband to drowning and her son to drowning. Just a reminder that Robert Fowler's father was the senior captain of the Balfour Williamson line. This was not a ship that he sailed in that I know of. Now, there are several stories or books in all of this, I'm sure. These are the founders of the Balfour Williamson line in Liverpool. It had offices in Valparaiso and in San Francisco. Stephen Williamson, up at the right of CELLARDYKE, of course, Alexander Balfour of Leven, and also David Duncan, who helped found it, but then left to pursue his own business. There's the statue of Henry Balfour in Liverpool. Gives you some idea of the wealth and status that the Balfour family reached there. More humble, but much more important to us, is the Wade Tower. Stephen Williamson gave the money to complete the building of the Wade, which had been started with the legacy of Lieutenant Andrew Wade, Royal Navy, and that enabled them to build the tower. Rather sad the state that it's in now. Also gifted by Stephen Williamson was the town hall in CELLARDYKE. So these are men who become wealthy and yet feel that education, that art, that benefiting the town which they grew up in were important. If only that were true today. Now, I promised you a beautiful lady, and here she is. This is ESCOCESA, the Scottish lady, built by Gourlay brothers for the Balfour Williamson line. She traded widely, San Francisco, Valparaiso, Sydney, and she is beautiful. She's an absolutely gorgeous ship. I love that picture. She was also very tough because she was still working in the 1920s, eventually ended up somewhere in the Arctic as a barge, I think, a bit undignified, but that's how tough they were. And here, just to prove it, because the Balfour Williamson line only insisted on the best quality of ships. Gourlay brothers say that those were their instructions: build them good and build them strong. And to prove it, here is the oldest intact iron-hulled vessel in the world. This is the Santiago. This is in the designated historical vessel Garden Island Ships Graveyard in Australia. And it was built in Methil in 1856. And there she still is, refusing to rust away. So, where are our connections? Here's our painter. There's our surgeon. There's that picture of Windsor Castle, which was donated by a Mrs. Logan of Liverpool. So where are our answers coming from? Well, some of them lie in Toxteth Park Cemetery in Liverpool, where there is a tombstone which says, "In loving memory of John Black, who died 10th of June 1923, aged 72 years." Now, I found that John Black, who was born in 1850, started work as an apprentice clerk in Anstruther and retired a wealthy merchant and a partner of the Balfour Williamson line of Liverpool. In fact, I found a reference to the fact that they were delighted to take him on as a partner because they were desperately needing some capital towards the end of the 19th century. So clearly he was a man of substance then. He left an estate of £211,000, which would be equivalent to about 18 million today. Now, I don't know very much about him. I can't find a photograph. There's nothing online that I could find. A visit to Liverpool would have been the answer, but you can't go visiting Liverpool this year. Now, I was able to get his will, however, to my sister, Elizabeth Williamson Black, all my watches, jewels, furniture, pictures, I love this bit, all my horses, carriages, motor cars, harness, saddlery and stable furniture, the sum of £50,000. Now, Elizabeth Williamson Black, as we know, was the great niece of Stephen Williamson. Neither of the surviving Black children had children of their own. I don't know what happened to Julia. She disappeared from the record on the census quite young. Did she die? Did she go into service? Did she marry and just disappear from our record? I don't know. I love the reference to the horses and the carriages. He was an incredibly generous man. His legacy includes dozens of gifts to children's charities, to sailors' charities, and of course to his hometown, to governors of the Wade Academy, Anstruther, £5,000 to be added to the capital funds and the annual income to be used. Now, this is an oddity for us now, in providing 2 exhibitions for pupils of the Academy at a Scottish university. Now, when I was head of English at Wade Academy, every year Tom Watson used to get us round the table with all the principal teachers to decide who would get the black bursary. Now, I have no idea where the black bursary had come from, and I'm not sure anybody else did. I think one of our children got it one year, but this is where it came from. It was the bursary set up by John Black, the son of Thomas Black, the surgeon. He also left to the Union Harbour Commissioners of Anstruther £2,000 to spend on the improvement of the harbour. He'd previously given money for the improvement of the harbour, and I think we don't have to think very hard as to why he was enthusiastic about harbour improvements. If Thomas Stevenson had arrived earlier to build the new harbour at Anstruther, his father most probably would not have drowned. However, he's not alone in TOXTETH Path Cemetery. Sharing his grave, Elizabeth Williamson Logan, beloved wife of J.R. Logan and sister of John Black, died 7th March, this is from her tombstone, died 7th March 1939, aged 76 years, kindest and most unselfish of women. And she certainly was. She married late in life. She was still unmarried when her brother died, and John Logan was a doctor. He had a son. The Blacks had no children. I think that's his statement on her tombstone. He also shares the grave, and that inscription is from his son. But here's the significant thing, that Elizabeth Williamson Black was the great niece of Stephen Williamson. She lived with her brother John in Liverpool and married Dr. John Logan. She inherited her brother's estate, and I have her will as well, Elizabeth Williamson Black Logan. Value of estate, £113,541, 4 shillings and 8pence. And an interesting change of, there's a social note here, since her brother died in 26, in the 13 years, the horses, the stables, the saddlery have gone, and it's the motor cars, jewellery and personal articles that are given to her husband. But the interesting thing here, and this is the payoff, this is what I was looking for, to the Corporation of Anstruther in the County of Fife, the portrait of my late father, Thomas Black, surgeon, by Robert Fowler. So that portrait, which hung for years in Anstruther Town Hall, which was almost lost because it was damaged and cast aside, was inherited from the estate of Elizabeth Williamson Black, the daughter of Thomas Black. I imagine it could have been commissioned by John Black. Certainly she inherited all his paintings, photographs and so on. And I'm guessing that she donated the picture of Windsor Castle before she died or after her brother died. But here's another interesting thing. To Vida Fowler of 6 Birmingham Avenue, £1,500. To Robin Fowler, the sum of £500. These are the children of Robert Fowler, the painter. And it seems fairly clear that the relationship between the two families, which had started in Anstruther in the 1850s and 60s, continued in England. Interestingly as well, now for all of us who own a boat in Anstruther Harbour, to the Commissioners of Anstruther Union Harbour for the upkeep of said harbour, £3,000. And to the United Boroughs of Kilrenny, etc., for the benefit of the inhabitants, £3,000. She left a lot of generous heritages. All of her indoor and outdoor servants received a year's salary, but her principal servant also received £1,000. And in 1939, that would buy you a very nice house or set you up in a business. She was a very generous lady. Many charities benefited, many friends and relatives. She had no children. So there is the castle, Windsor Castle by Robert Fowler. Mrs. Logan of Liverpool was Elizabeth Williamson Black. Oh, and we haven't forgotten the pontoon, the gates at Anstruther, funded by Fife Council, Fife Environmental Trust and the E.W. Logan bequest. Now, I think Elizabeth knows more about how this came about, but my general knowledge, belief or awareness is that Fife Council were about to draw the remaining money from the Logan bequest, or the £3,000 plus X number of years of interest, into the general Fife Common Good Fund or whatever. And it was spotted that it was being prized away from Anstruther, and it was used to build the pontoons. The notice saying that isn't weathering very well. But part of the legacy of the events of February 1864 resulted in further and final improvements to the harbour of Anstruther. So here we are, Thomas Black, born Weems 1818, crowned Anstruther 29th February 1864. And here is this. Now, I was walking the dog this morning and I had a sudden thought about the inscription that I'd never struck me before. Why is it so wordy? The Surgeon Thomas Black Anstruther by Robert Fowler R.I, also of Anstruther, 1878. And I think that also of Anstruther is stressing the pride in Anstruther of the Black children, John, Elizabeth, the pride also in their old school friend Robert Fowler and the tremendous career which he had created and reputation he created in the world of art. And that's why Anstruther appears twice. These are two notable sons of the town. So there is our portrait, restored to Anstruther Town Hall, inherited from Elizabeth Williamson Black. And that is the end of this particular detective story. Is there any questions? I'll try to answer.
That was brilliant, Glenn. Thanks very much. Really interesting. So I don't think there's anything in the chat box at the moment. No. So if anybody's got any questions for Glenn, if you want to either type it in the chat box or give us a wave now, and we'll see if we can catch your eye. And so Barbara's waving already. Barbara, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Excellent talk, thoroughly enjoyed it. I was interested, the portrait was done 14 years after his death.
I think so. There are one or two contradictory dates, but basically, yeah, about 14 to 20 years. Yeah.
Right. So are there any other portraits of Thomas Black to see how accurate it is?
There are none that I've seen online. This may be the only one.
Right.
I'm suspecting there may have been daguerreotypes of photographs, because there's nothing online to give me a picture either of the surgeon or of John Black, his son. So no, if anybody finds or hears of anything, I'd love to hear. But
yes.
I've not seen anything.
No, the artist must have been quite young then. His memory of Black he must have formed that as quite a young man. So yes. It would be very interesting to know how accurate a portrait it was.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it would be. I can imagine that he would have known him reasonably well. He could hardly be unfamiliar. He might well have treated the Fowler family, but as I said, John Black and Robert were at school at the same time.
Yeah,
they would certainly see him about the town. They all lived in a fairly small area. There may have been a photograph or a daguerreotype. The GOODSIRs, there are daguerreotypes of them. I don't see why there wouldn't have been one of Thomas Fowler somewhere as well. They might have had it, they might be lost.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
Who else has got a question for Glenn? Nick, yeah, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
That was a great lecture, really enjoyed it, thanks. And I was just wondering what kind of practice Surgeon Black might have had in Anstruther. You said that he delivered quads, which is incredible in itself in those days. Do you know, did he have access to a hospital, or was this must have been in the very early or pre-anesthetic days? Was it sort of kitchen table surgery he was doing, or any history there?
I have no history of that. Obviously, that would be the thought that occurs to me, that may have occurred to people while I was going through this, that there are exit points in this tale I've told where there are whole books in themselves. And Clearly, there's a lot about medical practice at the time that we don't have any information on. But yes, I can't really add anything to that. I didn't come across anything except the death certificate signed by him. There was that record of the quads, but just the general appreciation of him as a doctor. But specific information about medical practices, I haven't seen any yet.
Thank you. Anybody else for the question? David Wilson, don't forget to unmute yourself.
I'm back.
Since this is a detective story, do you think there's any suggestion of foul play?
Well, I mean, there was no evidence and no witness at the time. Ruling out foul play, well, it could have been revenge, I suppose. It wasn't theft because his valuables were still with the body. If you wanted to weave a historical romance around this, then maybe it was a revenge. He was lured to his death by an angry husband or something. I don't know. There is absolutely nothing. I mean, when I walked this route with a friend, and we tried to speculate on all these things about why you would suddenly turn from where you ought to be at going in School Green and end up in the harbour. Did he not go there at all? Did he wait till he'd left the Royal Hotel and then gone in the direction of the harbour to meet anyone? None of it adds up, because all the information we do have about him is that he was a very prominent citizen. Not that stops people having other sides to their lives, I know. And hugely respected and very much a family man. So there's no evidence. Nothing was advanced at the precognition, which is the Scottish equivalent of an inquest, I think. It was just a massive puzzle. Nobody could work out why he'd gone down there. So if anyone was planning to create a novel around this, then everything's open. Could be anything. I don't know if anybody has any other suggestion.
Any thoughts, anybody? Or other questions for Glenn? Mary, yep, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
I think that George Finlay must be related in some way, because he was a descendant of Stephen Williams. But George
Yes.
Finlay, other was Williamson.
Yes, hi Mary, by the way. I didn't know you were there. I hadn't seen you there before. Yes, George gave a really interesting talk about the Williamson family at our Grand Supper a few years ago when he did the Toast to Town and Trade. It was very interesting. I wish I'd been taking notes because I've forgotten most of it, but yes, you're right. And it's probably that George's family were related as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else got Elizabeth yet?
I'm curious to know whether you've looked at any of the similar aged people who would have come from Anstruther and CELLARDYKE at that time, who might have gone on to have equally illustrious careers.
I haven't, but that's another direction and another topic for another book, I think. The answer is there probably almost certainly were. Some people who might be able to suggest some. I'm sure. I think the characters who are in this story that we've got show just how remarkable the careers that were created. Then we also have Mr. Murray, I've forgotten his first name.
David Murray.
David Murray, of course, yes, who had become one of the biggest merchants in Australia and donated the Murray libraries to the town. So there's a whole pattern of people going away, making great successes in the empire. And of course, the empire was open for that entrepreneurship at the time. There were others in large and small ways who did the same. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there will be plenty of others. Interestingly, if he had made his way home on that night, he must have passed the schoolhouse where David Martin's father used to run the school. So there's another famous and celebrated Anstruther painter who lived just a few yards from where Robert Fowler lived later on. There was a time gap between them, obviously.
I think there's lots more detective work for you, Glenn.
I think I've got enough drawing all these threads together into the written narrative.
Thank you.
But yes, you're right. There's a story there. There's lots of stories. Yeah.
Hi, Johnny. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
There was no suggestion that as he stopped by the Royal Hotel, you said 5 minutes. Maybe somebody's timing was a little out and he'd been there for an hour or more.
That is
perhaps,
possible.
and then took the wrong path home. There's no suggestion. I know it's a nasty thing to say, but it seems, I thought.
If he'd been out treating a difficult case in a night like that, he might well have enjoyed, as we all would, I think, a refreshment when the job's over. But there's no evidence that he did. It was stressed that he went away after 5 minutes, but the precision of the 5 minutes might, for all we know, cover the fact that he may have stayed for a little longer and enjoyed a wee dram. Yeah. We don't know. But if that was the case, then nobody was saying.
Yeah. There was no post-mortem or anything on the body, obviously.
I don't think so, no. It did specifically say there was no sign of damage or injury upon the body, but there wouldn't have been, I think, an internal examination. Yeah. But at that time, most people would probably have a little drink in it, I think.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Things don't change that much.
We have to keep the tradition, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any more questions for Glenn? Not seeing any. Kate, Elizabeth, am I missing anyone? No. In which case,
I would maybe just ask about the caricature. That wasn't a self-drawn caricature, was it?
No, the artist's signature is on it, and I've forgotten, but I can look it up for you.
I noticed there were initials on it.
Yes.
F something W. Yes. Or
I have a note of it somewhere, but I've forgotten at the moment. It was somebody quite well known, I think, who did that. It was a very good caricature. I'll find it and send you it.
Kevin, yes. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Glenn.
John, this is water, by the way. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Glenn. First of all, yes, don't do any more research. We want this book published through the Borough Collection.
Yeah, I'll keep promising it.
Yeah. But what was the coverage in the local press, both in terms of at the time of his death and then also in terms of raising the subscription and the erection of the memorial? Was that covered? Do you know, did you manage to look back to the press at that time?
A lot of what I found was in the dictionary of the eminent men of Fife, where he had a page and a lot of that information came from. There was another newspaper report which I made some for a Cooper newspaper, which I made some notes from. I found it online, but unfortunately I lost the reference. So some of the information from that is there, but it's out there. There was also a newspaper report of the sinking of the Chacabuco, and the reporter had written a heart-rending account of the loss of the crew and the tragedy to the Black family, because it was linked back, of course, to the tragic death of the father as well. So yeah, so that exists. Yeah.
It's a pity that the memorial is so badly weathered. As you say, it's very difficult to decipher the inscription.
Yes.
But it's very prominent in the churchyard. And as you say, if you stand looking at the portrait, and if the blinds aren't drawn, you can look straight out, you know, as a juxtaposition of the memorial and the man's portrait. I'm not sure we can do anything about it, but we might want to put something alongside the memorial if we possibly can, to at least...
It might be an idea. I mean, I did my best to decipher what was there, but some words I just couldn't make out at all. Yeah. That salt wind coming howling up from the sea has scoured that face of the monument. It's also beginning to list a little alarmingly, so there might be a little bit required there as well. I think also maybe we could look at getting at least a copy of, or a smaller copy of Windsor Castle back to the town hall.
Yes, as you say, it's very large.
Yeah, there is nowhere to put it. If anybody's wondering why it's not back, why we've got a great big hall there, why don't we stick it in there? It used to hang in there, but now that hall, oh gosh, this will seem a long time ago, But many years ago, like last year, it was used for weddings, and there were large gatherings of people. How strange! And the wedding parties always wanted a blank canvas to do the decoration of the hall. Plus, if there was dancing and whatnot's going on in the hall, it would not be a good place for a portrait, a large painting, which was a significant bit of our heritage. So that's all the reasons why we couldn't. We did try, didn't we? We looked at it, it just wouldn't go. We thought it would be nice to have it on the stairway at the opposite side of the window, but it was way too big for that when we saw it.
Any last questions for Glenn? Oh, Fiona, yes. You need to find the unmute, don't you? On mine, it's down in the bottom left of the screen, but I don't know what device you've got. Maybe, I think, Sandra, were you waving to ask a question? Maybe if I come to you and then try and come back to Fiona after.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Hi, Glenn. That was really, really interesting. I love the way that you wove the different stories together. What really sort of shouts out at me is the sort of human element of this, and the fact that you said that he'd been struggling in the water for 2 hours and shouting for help.
Yes.
And what does that say about the citizens of Anstruther at that time? Or what does it say about what went on in Anstruther at that time? Was a fracas and people being up to no good? Was that quite a common occurrence, do you think?
Well, you've put exactly the two possibilities. It's either the people were selfish and indifferent, or it was known to be quite dangerous to go out if rowdies and drunks were out in the street creating mischief. That would have been round about, what, midnight, I suppose. I think he probably died about 1:30, I think it was reckoned. So yes, that would be about 12:30, and who knows, there might have been ne'er-do-wells down in that area. I mean, we do say nowadays it's dreadful how people tend to walk by or take selfies instead of going to help. It may not be a new thing, but maybe it was a dangerous thing to go out in the pitch black when you hear noises in the street. I don't know. Possibly both for different people.
Thanks, Glenn. Fiona, I see you've managed to.
Yes, sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Wasn't in the usual place. Actually, my question's related. I was fascinated, Glenn, that you said that the lights were turned off at 10. This would be lights. This would be gas lighting at this point, would it? 1960s.
I don't know if the gas lighting would have been introduced by then. It might. Perhaps somebody could tell me that. They may have been just oil lamps, or possibly still oil lamps at that time.
I just wondered how long that lasted, the 10 o'clock curfew kind of thing.
Right. I don't know. I think there was a movement to change it after this tragedy. And of course, Thomas Stevenson came along and completed the building of the harbour, I think 1868. So, you know, but I think probably the lighting in the harbour, the improvements came on about then. That would be my guess.
Okay. Thank you.
Nice to see you again, by the way.
Nice to see you too. Been a long time.
Any more questions for Glenn then? No, I'm not seeing anyone. If that's the case, then I'd like to suggest that everybody unmutes themselves so that we can thank Glenn by giving him a rounding rouse of applause. So while everybody's unmuting themselves for that, I'd like to say thank you very much, Glenn. That was a fascinating talk, and we will stop recording, but if everybody would like to stick around just for general chat, that'd be lovely. So thank you very much, Glenn.
You're welcome.
Right.